Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Fixate and Binge podcast. I'm your host, Joe. I'm here every single week. Every Tuesday, a new episode drops. We've been going now for 4 years. I have had over 100 guests on this podcast. This podcast is over 200 episodes deep. As some of you know, I love writing film reviews. I was an English major. I've done grad school. I have graduate degrees in English Lit. I've studied overseas. I just love writing. I love writing reviews of films. I used to write reviews of plays when I was a graduate student. Some of them have been published, but I like dismantling or deconstructing art and then discussing it. And in this case, the medium that I love more than the other mediums, I'm very sorry, Shakespeare, is cinema, because I think cinema is the new theater. It's cinema to us is what I believe theater was to the Greeks when it was first introduced. The ability to show moving pictures and engaging stories and incredible characters in extraordinary situations, I think, continues to inspire and move and motivate so many of us. Storytelling, I think, is an inherent human trait. We have had storytelling, I think, since the dawn of man, and I think we're going to continue to do it. And so films or television is just another method of how we tell our stories. And so that's really what this podcast is about. I love to talk to people that create those stories, like screenwriters, producers, directors, actors who inhabit the roles that we come to love and care about so deeply. Last week, I had writer and director Lillian T. Merrill on to discuss her film, which was Honeyjune, filmed in the Azores in Portugal. And this thing is picking up so much steam. It debuted at the Tribeca Film Festival. If you know your film festivals, Tribeca is one of the finest film festivals in North America, right up there with Sundance. So it's been a fantastic a journey to talk to filmmakers like Lillian about the work that they do. And I just love talking movies and TV with you guys. Now, if you've stumbled upon this episode and you haven't listened to this before, you're probably, I hope, drawn to the topic of today's podcast, and I hope I don't disappoint. I won't disappoint. I'll do my damnedest not to disappoint. I'm gonna do my best to give this particular topic the justice I think it deserves. Right away, before we jump into that, because it's a movie and TV podcast, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about a few things that I have been partaking of and perusing and snacking on and nibbling and sampling, as it were, that I've greatly enjoyed. First of all, my favorite TV series of the year, and it might stand as that for the rest of the year. I'm not sure what else is coming down the pike, but my favorite new TV series of the year is Apple TV's Widow's Bay. I hope by now, you have heard of this. If you don't have Apple TV Plus, this TV series is worth the price of just getting the service, as getting the streaming platform. It's that good. Every episode is just so self-contained, so brilliant, expertly done, wonderful characters, an interesting, fascinating, engaging concept, and it still has enough mystery and enough lore around it that will power us comfortably into a season 2. There's so much to be discovered. So much remains unanswered and unknown, but the core cast just knocked it out of the park. Stephen Root is fantastic. Matthew Rhys is fantastic. Stephen King praised this series. And when Stephen King puts his official seal of approval on content like this, which is a bit macabre, a bit dark, has some horror themes and elements to it, you know you're in good company. You know you're actually not watching true garbage. And this is the opposite of that. It's really the antithesis of that. I've seen it said elsewhere, and some people have repeated that Widow's Bay is what you get if you take Parks and Recreation and cross it with Midnight Mass, which was Mike Flanagan's wonderful, perfect 10 out of 10, no notes TV series, single season, one and done. on Netflix a few years ago, which remains one of the finest things I've seen of the decade. So on TV. So Widow's Bay does not disappoint. If you haven't started watching it, you've got a great 8, 9 episodes ahead of you to watch it right now. They're all episodes are streaming now. Unfortunately, you may have to wait 18 months to 2 years for season 2, but I don't mind because I know that they're going to do it right. They're going to do it correctly. And in the intervening time until the second season drops, we've got other things that we can enjoy, hopefully. So the other thing that I'm watching, which is also on Apple TV, which is kind of like, really? Apple TV doesn't have like a trillion things to watch, but it has so much quality things available, is Cape Fear. Now, this thing is starring Patrick Wilson, Javier Bardem, Amy Adams. I forgot her name last episode when I talked about this. Amy Adams. It's got an acclaimed cast. It's produced by Martin Scorsese, who directed, of course, the early 90s Cape Fear with Nick Nolte, Jessica Lange, excuse me, a young Juliette Lewis, and of course, Robert De Niro. So that was was put out to some acclaim that gobbled up a lot of nominations in the early 90s. This is a different take. It's not a remake necessarily. It's a completely different reimagining, and it's been updated of course, for the 21st century. And Javier Bardem plays the big bad. He plays the Max Cady character, and Amy Adams plays the attorney, who's kind of the Nick Nolte character. I mean, the original was made in the 60s, and it had Gregory Peck as the attorney, who was being terrorized by his former client, played by Robert Mitchum. That's the same Robert Mitchum, of course, that is absolutely chilling in Night of the Hunter by Charles Laughton, which is one of my favorite older films, one and done films. It's a stunning film. They must have asked him to channel his character from they must have asked him to channel his character from the Night of the Hunter to play the original Max Cady in the original Cape Fear. And there's things that connect the show to itself. I mean, it's interesting that Robert Mitchum cameos in the remake of Cape Fear by Martin Scorsese. It's also interesting, and I hope it doesn't give it away, but the daughter, played by Juliette Lewis in the early 90s one, also cameos in the TV series in a mysterious role. So it's kind of an interesting connection between all 3 iterations of Cape Fear. They've only released, at the time of this podcast recording, they've only released 4 episodes. The show it's going to crawl under your skin. It is creepy, at times a little icky, very sinister, very psychological, and you feel the noose tightening. But like the main characters, we as an audience are kind of plunged into the unknown. We know something doesn't feel right. We know who the good guys are. We think we know who the bad guys are. And the noose is tightening, and things keep developing and coming into focus. Every episode, an extra layer of the onion peels back. The depths of depravity, the depths of the true depth of the sinister motivations of some of these characters is starting to come further and further into focus, and it's horrific. It's horrific. And of course, Javier Bardem, perfectly cast, as if he wasn't already terrifying, as Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men. Now he plays Max Cady, which is a completely different kind of psychopath, and it's so good. It's so good. So if you're licking your wounds and mourning a little bit that you've got quite a long wait until the next season of Widow's Bay comes out, you're looking for something to kind of fill the time, fill that Widow Bay-sized hole in your heart, I think Cape Fear may do that for you. So that is a fantastic show. Very dark, though, much darker, much darker than any of the other cinematic iterations I've seen. So, buckle up. It's not for the faint of hearing or the faint of watching or the faint of character. So it's gonna test you, and it might just be too icky to be enjoyed. So it might be a guilty pleasure. So put the kids to bed and watch that. It's very disturbing. I had an opportunity with my wife to go and see Steven Spielberg's latest film, Disclosure Day. And I got to tell you, I came out of that film not thinking, of course, that it was the greatest film that Spielberg's ever made, not thinking that it's a top 5 or a top 3 film that Spielberg has made. Honestly, the man has made over 35 films in his lifetime. I'm not even sure if this counts as a top 10. But what it does do, and I think that's the best part about this, is the best compliment I can give this, is it provokes curiosity. It engenders deep questions, which I think was the main motive of making this film, Disclosure Day. You probably know, if you haven't seen the synopsis of it, you probably know that it has something to do with extraterrestrial life. Disclosure seems to suggest we have something that we don't know, that we need to find out, or that will be released, whether amicably or clandestinely. There is something that needs to come to the surface so that the rest of us can interrogate it and be aware of it. So it's about revealing truth. And so Disclosure Day, which I'm going to go into in another episode, I promise I'm going to do this. What that did was it inspired me to come up with a 2-part podcast. So what you're listening to is part 1 of a 2-part podcast. And I went through and curated my own personal list of the greatest films that have to deal with UFOs, UAPs, or extraterrestrial life, or alien life of some form. And some of the films we're going to discuss here are from my special curated list. You may have a different list than mine, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But I want to get into this in a little bit. And one of the other reasons I wanted to is because I'm thinking about my dad. My dad's still with us. His health isn't quite what it used to be. So he's in the sunset of his life. But while he's still here, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I've been able to tell him today, Happy Father's Day. Today, I'm recording this, is Father's Day. My kids have spoiled me. My wife has spoiled me, and I love them so much. I think of all the things that I've been able to become in life, the thing that meant the most was being a father. So that, and you'll always be a father. You'll always be a parent if you have children. So anyway, enough about me. I'm also thinking about my own father. And I wished him Happy Father's Day, of course, today. And the reason why that dovetails into the topic today is that my dad, in the late 80s to 90s, worked for NASA. Yeah, my father worked for NASA for 17 years. He was he would do simulation training for astronauts for entry, re-entry into the atmosphere. So they would do these mock training exercises for future astronauts that would get on the shuttle. He knew the 7 astronauts who lost their lives tragically during the Challenger shuttle disaster. He knew them. When they made the film Armageddon, Bruce Willis showed up to NASA. My dad saw him. My dad said he was a bit of a jerk. He was a bit pompous, real arrogant. The rest of the cast, he says, were really lovely, but his interactions with Bruce Willis, he didn't interact with him directly, but he saw the way Bruce Willis was behaving during the making. And when they were doing kind of a fact-finding visit to NASA and being given a tour, he says that Bruce was really kind of up his own butt. And I've heard that about Bruce before. But he also said that Tom Hanks was just a gentleman, a perfect gentleman, when they did the Apollo 13. And you had Kevin Bacon and the late Bill Paxton and Tom Hanks, who, of course, played those roles. Stopped by NASA. My dad got to, I think, shake hands and meet them, and said Tom Hanks was just such a gentleman. And of course he is. Of course he is. So that's not surprising. So anyway, growing up with my dad and hearing what he could talk about, because he also had special clearance. He was privy to certain things that the public is not privy to. But my dad would sometimes let slip some things over the years growing up. One of which was It wasn't even a theory to him. It was never a guess. It was never a supposition or an expression of faith or belief. It was knowledge to him that the 1947 crash in Roswell, New Mexico was an alien spacecraft, and that the government did retrieve 3 deceased bodies of aliens from that crash. Moreover, my dad said they kept the bodies at NASA for a time, and that when the Russians launched Sputnik, the Russian satellite, there was genuine fear that the Russians might be able to infiltrate our facilities, our top secret facilities, and be able to see evidence of what we had retrieved from Roswell. And so an intricate tunnel system was created at the Johnson Space Center outside of Houston, Texas. My father said that for the last 50 to 60 years that the U.S. government has been in contact with non-human biologics, non-human sentient beings from another realm, another dimension, or another planet system. He says that we have been in an open exchange of technology with them. My father also claimed, and I knew not to ask follow-up questions because my dad could get into some trouble with his clearance, that the nano biochip technology, to be able to store an entire room's worth of information into a microchip the size of your fingernail, he says that was exchanged with us from alien technology. They helped us develop that. Now, maybe that's debunked. Maybe some MIT scientists could say that's crap. We can show our work and how we arrived at that ourselves. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I'm just telling you what my father asserted. He says, ask yourself how we were able to go from storing our information in these giant refrigerator-sized processors. We were able, in only a few years flat, to synthesize all that information into the size of a microchip on your finger, the size of a fingernail, smaller than a penny. He says, think about that. So he says that the aliens, our contact with aliens, with alien life, has been relatively peaceful. And that the reason why the government is so keen to hide and keep that information from us is because we're afraid that other governments may take advantage of that. There's been a sincere fear that Christian evangelicals or just regular faiths of the world, be it Islam or Christianity, might have a crisis of faith, literally, if they are to learn that there is extraterrestrial intelligence outside of our Earth into the cosmos or the universe at large, and that it might cause a massive spiritual paradigm shift, a crisis of faith that could result in mass hysteria, could result in absolute panic, existential panic, that man is not the supreme beings of the universe as we have supposed we have been, that technology exists far advanced than our own. So anyway, I grew up with these things, and I grew up not doubting my dad. And to this day, my dad's been retired for years. He doesn't take back anything he said. I could ask him today as much as I asked him 40 years ago. What about those 3 creatures from Roswell, New Mexico? And it's weird because you can kind of tell. I know my dad, and my dad will look at me and say, oh, no, we had them. We had the bodies. Yeah, we kept them for experimentation. Lots of tests were done. So make of that what you will. I watched Disclosure Day, and I got to tell you, I love what Spielberg is brewing. I love that he's provoking. I love that he is pushing the idea that it's normal to ask for questions, and it's absolutely okay. It's absolutely okay for science and faith to peacefully coexist. We can find middle ground. So that's certainly one of the biggest themes in this film is that we have so much more to learn. We're not the center of our universe. We share life and sentience with beings far beyond our understanding. And so anyway, I got to thinking about films that I think perfectly personify the exploration of aliens and alien life and these things. And so what I did, like I said, was I put together a list, a curated list. I'm going to look that list up right now. So here on the live podcast, I am going to look that up, and I'm going to share with you the films that I have put on this list. And I had to update it. I had to put 2 relatively brand new films on this list. But I'm going to start real quick. The first film is The Day the Earth Stood Still from 1951. That's the first film. It's made only 3-4 years after the Roswell incident. It's made during the height of the Cold War. It's made during the atomic age. Pretty scary. Then I jumped to 1977's Close Encounters of the Third Kind by Spielberg. I think arguably one of his greatest films he ever made. And then, of course, 1982, also by Spielberg, E.T. And then also of 1982, John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a remake, of course. And then also John Carpenter's 1984 film, Starman. And again, this is, 3 films from John Carpenter. They Live from 1988. I also put down The Abyss from James Cameron, and of course Fire in the Sky, which is horrifying, from 1993. 1997's Contact with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. M. Night Shyamalan's Signs with Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix. District 9 from 2009. Under the Skin with Scarlett Johansson from 2013. Denis Villeneuve's Arrival from 2016. Jordan Peele's Nope from 2002 or 2022. No One Will Save You, which didn't get a theatrical release and just was streamed on Hulu. Project Hail Mary with Ryan Gosling that got released this year. And then finally, of course, Disclosure Day itself. So those films make my list of the best films about UAPs, UFOs, and extraterrestrial intelligence. So just to get into this topic real quick, because I know I've wasted enough time, hopefully not wasted your time, talking about getting into this a little bit. But I want to just start a little bit with some of the reasons these films are made. I'm not going to interrogate or act like I'm an expert on the existence of UFOs or UAPs. That's not what this podcast is about, because I'm not going to BS you. I'm not an expert on that. I'm not an expert on UFOlogy. I don't know all like Bob Lazar. I don't know everything. We're not going to talk about Area 51. We're not going to talk about whether it's true or not, or we're going to get into some esoteric deep dives into X-Files episodes that deal with this. That's not what the podcast is about. I want to talk about what these films about UFOs and UAPs or extraterrestrial life, what it's really trying to say about us, what themes drive the creation of these films. So it's tangentially about UFOs and UAPs and extraterrestrial life. But these films were also made with, I'm not saying an ulterior motive, but the subtext of some of these films is addressing something else too. On the surface, yes, UAPs, UFOs, extraterrestrial life, but under the surface, what is it really trying to say? What is the overarching message under the surface, as it were? So we're going to get into that a little bit. And of course, I talked about 1951's The Day the Earth Stood Still, and that really was a terrifying time. We had dropped bombs on Japan. We were made aware that the USSR, the Soviet Union, also had access to nuclear bomb-making technology. There was obvious an an arms race. The Cold War was beginning. The Korean War was about to kick off. The whole world was kind of reeling a little bit after World War II. You know, things were starting to, the void of the power void around the world was being filled with other countries. And of course, the Soviet Union was a big part of that. And so The Day the Earth Stood Still, I think it's made at the height of the atomic age. And there's a lot of real fear that we may be on the precipice of annihilating ourselves over territory, over culture, over access to resources, over maintaining control and supremacy over the earth and preservation. And I think those questions fed into the creation of The Day the Earth Stood Still, as a character, Klaatu, comes back and essentially warns us, you know, out of concern, not out of a desire to conquer us, but out of concern, that if we don't knock it off, we might wipe ourselves out of existence. And I think it was, you know, sometimes we might need an unbiased third party with no skin in the game to come and sit, you know, two warring parties at the table and say, knock it off. What's most important here? You know, let's listen to reason. So I thought that film had that message in it, and I thought it was very timely placed. And when I watched The Day the Earth Stood Still today, and you know, my goodness, it's over 75 years old now. It's 75 years old now. It's 1/4 years old now. That film very much still holds up. Special effects are fantastic. The creature designs, the ship design, all of it is done very, very well. It's not like Ed Wood Plan 9 from Outer Space bad. It's done actually pretty well for a sci-fi UFO film from the early 50s. So highly recommend that you check it out. I think you might even be able to watch it for free on YouTube. So please check that out. Now, the second film that I talked about in my list, and I guess I'm going in order that the films were released, was Steven Spielberg's 1977 Close Encounters of the Third Kind, starring, of course, Richard Dreyfuss as Roy Neary. He plays a father to kids in kind of an unhappy suburban family life, doesn't seem to have really found his place in the world, and phenomena, unusual UAPs, UFO, lights in the sky phenomena starts happening literally around the world, and he becomes enraptured with this, becomes fixated on it quite a lot, and it consumes his life, and it kind of upends everything. Which is the tragic part of this, was that it thoroughly disrupted his relationship with his wife and children. But he became so fixated. I know I keep saying that word, of course. He became so fixated on the phenomenon and the phenomena that he had to follow it to its logical conclusion. And what we're seeing here is that he felt that the universe had no place for him until this happened. And his curiosity led him on a path, an adventure, a treacherous one at that, to find his own place in the universe. And it really, when you think about Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and you think about it through the eyes of Roy Neary, played by, of course, and he was great. Richard Dreyfuss did such a fantastic job. I mean, it should have been Oscar-winning performance. It was so good. When you think about that, the film really symbolizes mankind reaching, striving for his own spiritual potential to know his place among the stars. Many of us will find that out once we pass on from this physical plane of existence. But in the case of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the character of Roy Neary gets to find that out while he still lives and breathes. And so the wonderful ending and the use of Francois Truffaut as one of the astrophysicists, and that, you know, even my cell phone has that same ringtone, you know, from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you know, bum, 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 bum. Yeah. So it's one of the finest films ever made, with one of the most mysterious but also satisfying endings I've ever seen. And you'll never look at The Devil's Tower quite the same way again. So there is that. Now, the next film, of course, is Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, made from 1982. I actually remember seeing that in the cinema as a kid. I remember watching this. The kid, Elliot, was like my age. He was a little boy. And he, is living in Southern California, and he happens upon a strange creature, befriends this creature, houses this creature, and then forms an inseparable, codependent, physical and telepathic bond with this otherworldly creature, which he dubs E.T. And I got to tell you that as I watch this, the film moves away from the Cold War hysteria of, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We're coming to take over and we're going to sublimate you and turn you into a mindless husk. This was a film that showed, surprisingly, that there is compassion, there is love, there is genuine humanity as an adjective. There's a genuine humanity in these otherworldly creatures. And it's almost like it gives us a glimpse of what society looks like when we're not warlike, when we actually put down our implements of war and begin caring about one another. There is no limit to what we can accomplish. There is no limit to what we can achieve if we just set aside our personal differences and grievances and cultural differences and these things and put them aside for a minute and work together. I mean, slight sidebar right now. World Cup is happening right now. Dozens of nations are in North America and Central America and parts of Canada celebrating through a shared game, a shared love of football or soccer. And we have nations that we diplomatically don't get along with very well, from Iran, of course, Iran right now, and beyond. But I got to tell you, it's pretty amazing to see the love and the acceptance and the warmth of so many nations in America being welcomed with open arms as they experience our food, our music, our traditions, and then we get a glimpse of their soccer traditions and their culture. And I saw this somewhere else. Somebody said, as these fans of these countries come to our soil, to our country, to support their team, their national teams, it's a little bit like your aunts and uncles that can't stand each other, but every year there's a family reunion and the cousins are like their best, are all friends with each other. Cousins don't have problems with each other. It's just the parents that have problems with each other. And that's kind of how it feels like. Our politicians don't get along with the politicians of other countries like Spain or Italy or whatever it may be. And by the way, that is the case. But the fans don't care. We put politics aside. We put religion aside, and we're just enjoying. We're enjoying the exchange, the cultural exchange, and the experience of putting aside those differences and enjoying something that brings joy. And I start thinking about these instances like E.T., where you have characters, their purpose in the universe is not to be malevolent, it's not to be sinister, it's not to conquer, it's not to absorb and without consent. It's to observe and collect and to be curious. And so these characters, these extraterrestrial beings, have accidentally left behind one of their own, which is E.T. They're coming to pick up our flora and fauna and observe our world and our creations, and they left in a hurry, and E.T. was left behind. And he's befriended by Elliot, and Elliot is living in a single-parent home with a hardworking mom and an older brother and a younger sister, but the government, the sinister government, which must control all of this information because the public can't have it, is coming and closing in, and the walls are closing in. And I started just thinking about what that film was really about. And as I read more about it, I read that Spielberg's parents' divorce when he was a kid greatly influenced the themes explored in E.T. That you have Elliot growing up without a dad, with his mom, and his mom was an important part of his life. But growing up without a dad, that was really hard for him. And that's essentially what's happening in E.T. You got Elliot without his dad, Spielberg without his dad growing up for a little bit. And so it came from a very personal place. I'm so grateful that Spielberg has resisted all offers to make a sequel to it. And he's been resistant to that for over 45 years. And I'm so glad that almost 45 years. I'm so glad that he has resisted those temptations to cash in and make a big sequel that really would, in my opinion, would ruin the impact of the original, especially the ending. Now, like I said, I was a kid. I saw this at the cinema. I cried. A few years ago, my wife and I realized that our own children had not seen E.T. We felt bad. We felt like we'd robbed them of a great cinematic experience, and so we put it on. We watched it. And I hope my kids aren't listening to this, but my kids were crying at the end of it. Few films and few filmmakers have the power to evoke those kinds of feelings across generations, across decades, across time. And so, Steven Spielberg, I tip my hat. You, sir, are a legend for storytelling. So anyway, I really very much enjoyed E.T. Now, another film that's very similar to E.T. tonally, but it's more of an adult themed take on extraterrestrial experiences is Starman, directed by John Carpenter. Now, John Carpenter is very, very good at creepy, sinister, horrific type films, but in the case of Starman, it was a very, very poignant, heartfelt example of a sentient alien being that is sent to Earth and absorbs or assumes the likeness of Karen Allen's deceased husband. Karen Allen, of course, played Marion Ravenwood in the original Raiders of the Lost Ark, original Indiana Jones. And that's exactly what's going on in this film. And it's Jeff Bridges. Jeff Bridges is playing the role. And what he finds is that Karen Allen's character is grieving. She was deeply in love with her husband. And here's a being from another place that looks exactly like him. And so there's a little bit of humor and a lot of discovery as this alien, it's basically a story about an alien having a human experience, which is similar to E.T. But it really is about an alien having a human experience. And some of the idiosyncratic things that happen during that are somewhat comical and somewhat sad. But it's got one of the best endings of a sci-fi film like this. Just such a great ending. But again, these films feature a sinister, controlling, mysterious government trying to control the narrative, trying to control what's happening. So if you sticking with that theme, as it was in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, as it was in E.T., and as it was here in Starman, that's what's going on, which is such a great. I mean, if you want a double feature that really hits E.T. and Starman, that's a great double feature. The next film I want to talk about is also from John Carpenter, and that is The Thing. Now, this, of course, was a remake of the 1950s film The Thing from Another Place, or The Thing from Another World, I believe is what it was called. And this one was made in 1982. It was a box office failure. There were, 1982 was rough on two very wonderful films, Blade Runner by Ridley Scott and The Thing by John Carpenter. But in the decades since those films were released, there has been an enormous groundswell of love and support for both of those films. I mean, Blade Runner has ascended to become an all-time classic, and The Thing is required viewing for any fan of horror. In fact, because of where it's located at an Antarctic research facility. That's the setting of the film. They still will show The Thing at the actual Antarctic research stations for the first night of new scientists who come to the facility. That's just part of the initiation. You have to watch The Thing. As if it isn't creepy enough to live at the bottom of the world, surrounded by ice, now you have to watch The Thing. So what the film is really about. It's about a malevolent alien that is discovered embedded in the ice, and it actually will absorb and assume the shape of different people or different organisms around it. It is extremely malevolent. Like I said, it's malevolent. That's the M word. It's very evil. It's very sinister. And its only instinct is to replicate and survive. And so what it does is it literally becomes almost a mystery whodunit, because you're never quite sure who the alien has assumed the shape of. And it's got some of the best special effects, practical effects, creature effects you have ever seen. I mean, horrific nightmare fuel special effects. If I had seen this in 1982, and I'm very glad I didn't, I would be traumatized even today. I would have had one hell of a childhood. Those images would have been seared into my consciousness. I probably wouldn't have been able to sleep at night. So if you know what I'm talking about, if you know the scenes that I'm referring to, some of the most horrific scenes, yeah, if you don't like horror, you don't like stomach churning things, then don't watch it. But this is a great film. It is executed so well. There's such a suffocating sense of paranoia and distrust at this isolated research facility at the bottom of the world. I mean, they might as well be in an alien spaceship in the middle of outer space, like Alien, but Ridley Scott. You know, in space, no one can hear you scream. Well, if you're cut off from radio communication in Antarctica, nobody can hear you from Antarctica screaming either. So I highly, highly recommend this. Now, this was, like I said, made in 1982 at the height of the Cold War. I mean, the Cold War was kind of winding down. We know that now because it ended before the 1980s were over, but it was still very much a thing. And Red Scare, which is the fear that communist Red China or Red Soviet Union ideologies were overtaking our entertainment figureheads and seeping into our politics. That was not as much a concern. McCarthyism was kind of a thing of the past and one of the more shameful episodes in American culture post-World War II. But the Cold War was still very much going on. And so this kind of paranoia and distrust of the other, of beings, of otherness, permeates and underpins John Carpenter's The Thing. And it's one of his finest films. I love Big Trouble in Little China. I do. And I love the first Halloween films, the first and second ones. But you know what? I think The Thing, when it's all said and done, and poor John Carpenter is quite old, he's up there now. When it's all said and done, I think The Thing is John Carpenter's signature masterpiece. It stands above all of his other creations. It is that good. And you can't argue against that, I don't think, because his film has held up so well over the last almost 45 years. It's still very, very much required viewing for anyone interested in the genre of horror. So that's something to think about. Now, the other thing I want to talk to you about was made in 1993. I watched this film and it actually scared me. I was kind of freaked out by this film. And that was Fire in the Sky. Now, Fire in the Sky tells the alleged true story of a Arizona mountain logger named Travis Walton. And he and his logging buddies one night encountered a bright light in the Arizona forest. And one of the bright lights had what looked like a tractor beam or a very bright spotlight that shined on Travis. And he was left behind. So his coworkers saw him in this light, and they left out of tremendous fear. They left him. They left him, and he was not to be found. He went missing for 5 days. He went missing, and then he turned up. And when he turned up, he had the most incredible, outrageous story, and it's to this day. It has never been debunked. It has never been debunked. But Travis says that during those 5 days, he was taken on board the alien spacecraft and he was experimented on horrifically. and that while he was on this alien spacecraft, he saw other human subjects who were also being horrifically experimented on. And when he came back, the mystery of his disappearance, he began to talk about it. And what ends up happening is he ends up angering a lot of people, particularly his coworkers, particularly his company, which is not, it's not good for business that aliens are snatching loggers out of the forest. That's not good for business, right? It's not good for tourism, right? Similar theme to, in Jaws, the mayor's like, the beach is open and absolutely safe for everyone. There is no great white up here in Martha's Vineyard or whatever. So what results from that is it's almost like another trauma because he isn't believed. His story is too fantastical, and they think that he's a fabulist. They think he's telling this story for fame. And what the film does a great job, and the actor that plays Travis Walton is D.B. Sweeney. He hasn't had much work lately, but he did excellent work here. And Robert Patrick, who of course was the Terminator, the liquid Terminator in Terminator 2, James Cameron's Terminator 2 that was hunting Schwarzenegger. Robert Patrick plays the best friend of Travis Walton, and we kind of see the film through his eyes because he's loyal to his friend. But the story his friend is telling is such a leap of logic and an extraordinary leap of faith. He can't understand what his friend has to gain by lying about it. So we very much see the film through his eyes. But Fire in the Sky, I think, is still one of the most horrific alien films made, based entirely on a supposed true account. So if you want to learn a little bit more about Travis Walton, just type in Travis Walton. This happened in 1975 or 70. Yeah, it was in 1975. It was in November of 1975. Travis Walton disappeared in the Arizona mountains. We're talking deep in the Arizona mountains, right? It wasn't like he just, deep up in the high forest. Disappeared one night in the mountains under a mysterious bright light. Wasn't seen for 5 days. When he reemerged, he had injuries that were consistent with what he says he experienced aboard the alien spacecraft. The aliens on that ship are terrifying. The practical effects in this film are fantastic, and I think Fire in the Sky doesn't get enough love, doesn't get enough viewership. You should check it out. Again, ignore the fact it was made in 1993. It's not got really bad special effects. It's very well done, and I think you deserve to see it. Now, the other film that I definitely want to talk about, and as we kind of start to wrap this up, is They Live, also by John Carpenter, right? They Live. Do you know the story about this? The story about the film is a character finds a pair of sunglasses, and that character is played by the late Rowdy Roddy Piper, and it's one of my favorite films, one of my favorite action films. It still, I think, is my favorite fist fight between two characters who don't know kung fu or any of that stuff. But it's one of the longest fist fight scenes between two men in cinema history, and it's this extended, over-the-top, ridiculous. I mean, I wouldn't say it's over the top because they're doing Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon type gymnastics during the fighting, but these two just beat the hell out of each other. I think it's like a 7-minute fist fight in this alley, and it just goes back and forth, as Rowdy Roddy Piper tries to get this other character to put on this pair of sunglasses. Because when you put on this pair of sunglasses and you begin to look around, you realize that there are aliens who are walking amongst us. These sunglasses, no idea where they came from. That's never really explored. But these sunglasses allow human beings to see who the aliens are amongst us. Moreover, and this is more frightening, you're able to see the subliminal messages peppered on billboards, on magazine covers, and on news broadcasts. And this is really a film about Reaganomics. And it was made in 1988, towards the end of the Reagan administration. We had seen kind of the effect of what Reaganomics was doing to the country. We're seeing the effects of corporate greed, mass media manipulation, and unrestrained capitalism and what it was doing to us, and class struggles. And we still live with the consequences of Reaganomics today, of class struggle today. And John Carpenter was through this creature feature, this Aliens Are Among Us, was showing how easily led the populace can be by media manipulation and by corporate entities whose sole design is to get us to consume. In fact, there are subliminal messages peppered throughout the cities and things. When you put the glasses on, you can see them, and it says, procreate, have more children, consume, all this stuff. Why? Why consume? Because it helps the corporations become greedier. If there are more consumers, there is more dependence on corporations. And boy, isn't that true today? Do we see media manipulation today? I mean, is that even a trick question today? Do we see greedy corporations? For the first time in human history, we have a trillionaire. We don't need a trillionaire. We don't even need billionaires, but we've got a trillionaire. So we're living with the effects of Reaganomics. And again, John Carpenter, way ahead of the game, made this wonderful film called They Live. And the creature creations, when he puts these glasses on, they're so unique and distinct. It's fascinating. Now, there was no sequel made from it, and I don't think it needs a sequel. I'd love to see something a little more about where these creatures come from, what planet they come from, and what is the purpose. But again, it goes back to what my dad said to me when I was a kid, that there's been, over the years, there's been an exchange of intelligence and information between alien entities and the U.S. government. And maybe this was one of those examples of the government being complicit in letting these aliens live amongst us and influence our culture and our society so that we can become more dependent on capitalism. We can become consumers so we can keep the economic machine turning and churning. So, in a way, you almost feel like your sheep, like your cattle, your livestock in a giant abattoir producing something for a society that won't take care of you and owes you nothing and won't give back. So there's definitely that. Now, the other thing that I thought was also really clever that made my list, and I talked about it, was James Cameron's The Abyss. And this was more of an environmental message. And of course, if you've seen the Avatar films, you know that James Cameron is probably the biggest environmentalist Hollywood, bigwig on the planet right now. Everything is about preserving the earth and the sanctity. Well, The Abyss was leaned into this a little bit, but it also leaned into some of the themes explored in Starman and E.T., that we encounter advanced beings and, the traits of humanity, of kindness and empathy and love, are not exclusive to humankind, to Homo sapiens, and that there are other beings advanced further and farther than we are that possess those same traits. And you can see examples of what happens to their society when they fully embrace these things. And I thought that The Abyss was just such a clever and unique take that some of the creatures that we think exist into the night sky might actually be in the oceans beneath us. And, the oceans remain largely underexplored. We can put probes on Mars, and we can send satellites out into the solar system and take pictures of other planets, but we still don't really know what is in the deepest areas, like the Mariana Trench of our own oceans. And I put The Abyss on here mostly because a lot of UAP sightings. Now, UAP means unidentified aerial phenomena. It doesn't necessarily mean little green men from Mars, but it means we're not able to identify what that is or where it comes from, nor are we able to understand the technology. There's no known technology that can produce the physics of what we're seeing these things do. But in the last few years, we have had the Pentagon declassify lots of video footage and images of UAPs or UFOs disappearing or rising up out of the ocean. So maybe The Abyss was a movie far ahead of its time as well. Maybe there are civilizations and creatures and beings living deep deep within our vastly unexplored oceans that are hidden from us. So that's one thing that's the reason why I included the abyss on this list, is because we have had sightings of different UAPs and things either coming up out of the ocean or going down into it rapidly, defying physics and things like that. So that's why that makes that list. Now, the last film on this list, and I promise we're going to have a second episode of this, and I'm going to continue, and that second episode will end on a deeper dive into Disclosure Day. So if you haven't seen Disclosure Day, you got 1 week to see it if you intend to listen to the second half of this podcast series. But the last film I want to talk about, of course, is Contact, which was written by Carl Sagan, the late Carl Sagan, one of the most admired people that I can think of, one of the smartest Americans we've ever had, a man who said, the universe is a pretty big place. If it's just us, it seems like an awful waste of space. I love that. And that seems to be one of the themes of Contact, in which Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey are in this film. But Jodie Foster has been intercepting signals from space. Now, the SETI, in the SETI organization, which stands for, it's an acronym, it stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. They received in the early 70s radio signal blasts from deep outer space. We're not quite sure where that came from, but they were distinct, pulsating radio signals from beyond our solar system, the origin of which we're not sure where. And so as a result of receiving that, the United States government invested heavily in building these enormous, large satellite dishes that the purpose is to intercept other radio blasts or signals from outer space, because it might be that we are being communicated with, and we want to have the tools to intercept those communications and try to decipher their meaning. This film is about that. It goes a little further and talks a little bit about the struggle, the internal struggle, where science and faith have to coexist, and what happens when what the narrative or the facts that science is discovering completely dismantle the claims of faith. And there's a theme of trying to suppress this, trying to keep this information out of the public eye. Now, some people say that religion is necessary and an important part of the American experiment in this country for the last 250 years since we've been a country, because the sociologists and psychologists have found evidence that deeply religious enclaves or communities are more easily controlled and more easily manipulated because of their willingness to believe. That sounds really offensive. If you are religious and listening to this, that might have rubbed you the wrong way to hear that. I'm not saying I personally subscribe to that, but I believe that might be one of the prime reasons why faith is so important or intertwined with government policy, whether it's the divine right to conquer the United States so that it can become a Christian nation, drive out the heathens, the Aborigine or indigenous Indians who were living here, drive them out. They don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe in Christ, drive them out. That was certainly the prevailing feeling back then. We're a little bit more progressive now, but there are still examples of kind of Christian fundamentalist evangelical thinking that suggests that America has a divine mandate to rule the world and call the shots, and all the other nations must bend the knee. That type of prevailing thinking has been throughout time, throughout the American experiment. There are examples. There's a case to be made. In other words, I'm not the expert to say it, that you can influence whole swaths of people, a whole chunk of the demographic that are deeply religious, into doing things that the government wants you to do. So one of the things that happens in Contact as she makes contact, Jodie Foster's character makes contact with an otherworldly sentient being, The concern is, as she goes to travel to visit with these beings, this higher plane of existence, as she goes, that it must be stopped because of the danger it poses to the control that faith has over humanity. We lose that control. We have chaos, anarchy, people having an existential crisis of faith, which is very much one of the themes of Disclosure Day and one of the concerns and worries. The government does feel, I think, that it has a moral obligation to save ourselves from information we're not ready to receive. Sir Thomas More, one of the things that Sir Thomas More did say as a reason, a rationale why he did not want the Holy Bible to be available in the mother tongue of England, in English. And he gave this great metaphor. It's an interesting metaphor. He's wrong, of course, but he says, a fly may wade in, but an elephant can drown. And so what he was saying was essentially pearls before swine. You give the Bible to them, they won't be able to appreciate it, and they'll be overwhelmed by it. So he didn't want the lay members of the church to know or have access to the language of the Bible. It needed to remain a mystery to them. Why? Because they could more easily be controlled. So who understood the Bible? Who knew Latin? Royalty, noblemen, and the clergy. That represented less than 1% of England's population. Imagine being controlled by the aristocracy or the church and told what the Bible says and what you are supposed to do with your life. So it was control. A fly may wade in, but an elephant can drown. My brother served several tours in Afghanistan as a member of the Special Forces. And I'm not trying to be insensitive, but I asked him, I said, what's it like being in Afghanistan? Because you've been over there multiple times, and you've been in and out of these villages in Taliban areas, and you've been in some hot zones. What's it like when you go into these villages? I mean, are you greeted? He's like, honestly, I go into these villages, and a lot of these villages, especially the smaller ones, are ruled by mullahs, and mullahs are essentially the village elder, almost like the mayor, but the mouthpiece for the village. What they say is kind of law. They want to take a child bride, they take a child bride. They want 2 goats at the next feast, they take 2 goats. They want this, they want that, they take it. My brother said, most of these mullahs we have found are illiterate. They don't know how to read the Quran, but they're expected to interpret what the Quran's teachings are to help control the village. So you just think about that, like ignorance is an amazing tool in the hands of powerful people. Just as much as Sir Thomas More, hounded and hunted William Tyndale for the rest of his days to try and get him killed, declaring him a heretic and having a death sentence declared on him, and then torturing and suppressing people who were found in possession of an English translation of the Old Testament or the 5 books of Moses. There is something to be said about losing control. And when you have an ignorant populace, they're more easily led by the nose. And that's certainly something I think that's explored in Contact. It's one of its themes in Contact. And it's definitely discussed, and it's one of its main themes in Spielberg's Disclosure Day. And I will be talking about several other films on the next episode of the Fixate and Binge podcast. We'll do a deep dive into all this stuff. I've even added Project Hail Mary into this. So I think this is going to be a very fun 2-episode discussion on the history of making alien films or extraterrestrial films or UAP films in Hollywood and what they're really trying to say. I think these films have less to say about what's happening out there and more to say about what's happening in here. But we'll get into that. Anyway, thank you for listening. You guys have a great week. I will see you next week. I always try to end these podcasts with a positive message about your mental health and well-being. And I will just say, count your blessings. That's a common phrase you've probably heard, but I want you to actually do it. I want you to count your blessings. Do you have a hot shower? That's a blessing. Do you have 3 meals or 2 meals a day? That's a blessing. Do you have a pillow to sleep on? That's a blessing. Do you have a job? You have a means to support yourself. That's a blessing. I'm describing things that millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world don't have access to. And you know what's crazy? A lot of them would be happier than you. It's amazing, isn't it? Some of the happiest people on the planet are from third world countries because they prioritize what makes them happy. And it's community, it's family, it's friends. And I hope you have all those things in your life. Anyway, I'll see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. I'll be back next week. I promise the discussion will continue and we will get more into this. Again, you've been warned. I'm going to do a deep dive of Disclosure Day next week. Spoilers aplenty, so you have time to still see it, and you should. Anyway, take care. See you next week. Bye-bye.